And after about 5 seconds, the advice monster in their brain goes, oh, this is great. I'm going to add some value to this conversation. And they kind of like stop listening.
Yeah.
And they're just waiting for the moment to kind of interrupt with the advice.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and, well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm here, of course, with Patty McCord.
Yeah, howdy.
And today we have a very special guest. I'm very excited. Michael Bungay Stanier. And listen, his book, The Coaching Habit, is one of the best-selling coaching books out there. He is the #1 thought leader in coaching. I don't know how you get that title, but
I'm not sure either. but I'm delighted.
I'm delighted for you. I want to know how you got it. And you were the first Canadian Coach of the Year. Mm-hmm. And you are also a global coaching guru. Since 2014.
I have so many random coaching labels attached to me. I'm just about to enter the Coaching Hall of Legends, which is something that the Thinkers 50 have come up with. And I don't even know what that means, other than it sounds like a retirement home for people. I'm like, we just need to shuffle you off the stage. So we've invented a thing called the Hall of Legends.
Go over there and sit with the legends. Patty will be in there with you in a minute. It'll be fine. Yeah.
We're going to crochet blankets together and ask good questions.
But they'll be legendary.
Yeah. Well, I want to be a legend. That sounds amazing. But you, upon all these other things, you're a Rhodes Scholar and you do lots of public speaking, lots of exciting, engaging stuff. But really tell us all about you and who you really are. Yeah,
there's somebody, I can't even remember who it was, maybe George Bernard Shaw, that said, look, you should never trust anybody's biography if it's just all victories. Because, that's the least interesting thing about people for the most part. It's mostly the journey and the stumbles and the struggles that are most interesting. So, I've got all those shiny medals, which are great. And I love them. But, I finished high school. I was banned from my high school graduation for something that became known as the balloon incident.
Oh, no.
I went to law school in Australia, and I left law school being sued by one of my law professors for defamation.
Well, wait, hold on. What's the balloon incident? I need to know. What'd you do?
It sounds more mysterious when it's just like a tease like that. But I went to a school. The headmaster of 40 years was retiring. And the class before us that had graduated had kind of caused havoc. They'd super glued all the locks. This is in Australia. They brought in a flock of sheep onto the main quadrangle to eat that. They'd written a whole lot of obscenities with weed killer on the playing fields. So certain parts of the grass died.
You weren't a part of it.
We weren't part of it. We were the class that followed that, but we got given this very strict. There'd be no shenanigans on your last day at school because it's the headmaster's last day, and the last time it cost us a fortune. And I was like, well, I get that. But, we've got to be able to do something slightly outrageous to celebrate. So I went to a Church of England high school, and we had a chapel we used to go to on a weekly basis, which was round with a conical roof. And so my very innocuous act of rebellion was to sneak in at 5 o'clock in the morning and fill the chapel roof with helium balloons.
Horrible.
I mean, exactly. I mean, if there was a gentler act of rebellion.
But that isn't too bad. You had to miss your graduation for balloons in the chapel ceiling.
Yeah. Me and my dangerous collaborators, we all got banned from our graduation, and we were all kind of like the high achieving kids in the school as well. So it made the graduation weird because, we won a percentage of all the prizes, and they're all like, this person can't be here tonight. And then the rest of the people would like applaud for 10 minutes as an act of, it was a whole.
Oh, goodness. And then you go to law school and you're getting sued. How do you become the MBS
How do I become the
I'm
man I
calling you
am
by your
today?
initials, the MBS that you are today.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the saying, inspiration is when your past suddenly makes sense. But I kind of look back on my past and I'm like, there's no rhyme or reason to how I got here today. I just got stumbled into some lucky breaks. So I finally finished university. I've been in university now 8 years, way too long because I did a master's degree at Oxford. No clear idea what I wanted to do with my life. And, I applied for various things. I almost got a job in advertising. I went to McKinsey because they headhunt Rhodes Scholars, and I was self-aware enough to go, I'm definitely never going to thrive in McKinsey. And I found this very small innovation company. Before innovation was really cool, and this is like in the 90s, it hadn't really become a thing yet. And so I didn't even really understand what I was signing up for. But I had this great first job because they were all about whatever business as usual is, don't do it. So I could show up and I had long hair and I had earrings and I made my own clothes, and they're like, you're weird, but we kind of like it. You're part of the kind of weird brand of ours.
You made your own clothes?
I did.
Like sewed them?
Yeah, on a sewing machine.
Well, I have noticed, like, just in following you, like, you are very fashionable and you like color and pattern. And
I do. But, the thing about certainly in those days, a man sewing his own clothes was so unusual that the standard for it was there was no standard. It was just a miracle that there was any piece of clothing on me at all. So I would make a shirt and I'd have the sleeves in the wrong hole, so the pleating was wrong and the collar didn't work at all. But everyone was like, it's a miracle. I'm like, it's a disaster, but it's also a miracle.
yeah.
Part of my success is having a fairly robust sense of ego, which is like, I fundamentally am wired to go, look, I'm pretty good, which is really helpful. And I hadn't quite realized that it's not that common. I've got a sort of a built-in, wired-in sense of confidence. Secondly, ambitious, and also not that worried about details. There's pros and cons to that.
Yeah.
I need some people around me when I grow businesses or I do things that are better at details than I am. But I'm like, look, it doesn't matter that the sleeves are in the wrong thing. This is just cool that I'm having this adventure and I'm trying some stuff out and I'm making clothes, and that's part of the joy.
So you were at this innovation firm that allowed you to be you.
I'd frame it slightly differently, is that what it didn't do was crush me. And I do think that sometimes first jobs can be more about, we're just going to beat you into shape so you fit into capitalism. And they kind of blew on the embers rather than squashed the embers.
Right. Which is, when you're talking about your sense of confidence, I'm like, yeah, white cis guy, Rhodes Scholar, going to Oxford, right? I mean, well, of course you're confident. Who wouldn't be? But I think when we get into your coaching style and the things that you talk about is like, well, not necessarily, right? It doesn't guarantee you that confidence. And when they beat you up, which they would have done at McKinsey, my sister's was a lifelong Arthur Andersen person. Yeah. I mean, by the time she was a professional in that firm, I mean, she was just beat to a pulp. Yeah. She was good.
Being spat up and chewed out.
But she was, I mean, she was well formed for what they wanted her to be.
Right.
But it was through torture mostly.
Yeah. And look, I having hung out with a fair number of Rhodes Scholars now in my life.
Yeah.
There's a lot of twitchy people in that community who are kind of like, I'm not quite sure how I got here. I'm a bit paranoid about that. And there's, in fact, part of what's driven them on is a sense of anxiety and a sense of not enoughness.
You should be doing something. Huh?
Yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, this innovation company was great fun, liberating in many ways. But at a certain point, I was like, we're not actually having much success with anything. I played a very small role in stuffed crust pizza. And I'm like, that's not something I want on my tombstone. and I helped invent a whiskey for Diageo that has subsequently been called the world's worst ever single malt whiskey. So I was like, it's
that's
fun.
An award in itself.
This whole thing is fun. Like, you would run focus groups and you generate prototypes. And so it had a lot of kind of joy and playfulness in the work. But I'm like, but am I making a difference to the world? Not really. So I moved into a change management consultancy, a small boutique change management consultancy. And didn't really do that well there, but I participated in mergers and all sorts of different change experiences. And it kind of built my awareness of what it takes to actually thrive and succeed in organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I also built my awareness of actually how hard change is in organizations, how fundamentally resistant to change organizations are. That's the very nature of a system. It's like you push in and it pushes back, homeostasis. And that took me from London to Boston. This little consultancy tried to set up a satellite office in Boston. We were relying on one big client, our big American client who was going through a merger. That client fired us about a week after we arrived in Boston. So we spent the next 3 years struggling to make payroll. And that finally got shut down. I set up another job as a consultant in Canada. My wife and I had gone to our local pub because we were like, we need to move on from Boston. We didn't know where. So we each wrote down the name of 3 cities we'd like to live in and beer coasters. And at the count of 3, turned them over, and Toronto made both the beer coasters. So we're like, okay, we're headed for Toronto. I got a job as a consultant lined up, but my flight from Boston to Toronto was on 9/11.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that chaos happened. And amongst all the other chaos, the job I had vanished because all the consultants were like, I don't think we're hiring anymore.
Yeah.
So I got across the border, found a bridging job. When they fired me, I finally realized I was mostly unemployable and set up my own business, which eventually became Box of Crayons, which eventually found its focus in really trying to unweird coaching so that we gave busy managers and leaders a kind of a practical way to understand coaching, because I trained as a coach. I could really see the power of coaching. I thought it was a really liberating leadership technology, but it just came with so much baggage and it was taught so badly in so many instances. It was like, people teaching life coaching, just trying to do the same stuff in organizations, that I was like, I want to build a way of understanding coaching that was kind of manager-centric, so it fit in with their busy life and their obligations and the way power works in organizations. And that became the Coaching Habit book, and stuff has kind of flown from there.
Did you lean on work from other like sports coaches? Like when I left Netflix and I started like traveling around and speaking like you do, I was on stage a lot with professional athletic coaches. And God, I learned a ton from them. I mean, it was so straight up, right? The results are win the game. You got to be the best team member you can. We're gonna field the winning team. And you know what? If you're not on it, no harm, no foul. You did a good job. Thanks for your effort. Going to move up to the next person. Did that influence you consciously, or do you draw from that? Or
not hugely, Patty, because in no ways is this the whole truth about how sporting coaching works.
Yeah.
A lot of the time you associate sporting coaching with quite directive guidance. You're like, okay, we're doing this, we need to do this.
Right.
This
the rules are simple.
You need to execute the playbook. Now, there's a lot of coaching that is more kind of question-led, empowering. You're like, if you're coaching the rugby union All Blacks, you're like, this is what we're seeing. What do you guys think we should be doing to figure this out? So there's that kind of greater interaction. But I was more influenced, as a volunteer, as a young man, as a 17-year-old, I volunteered on something in Australia called Youthline, which was a youth crisis telephone counseling course. So it's like youth suicide hotline. And that's where I got my first understanding of what they call Rogerian counseling, which is just basically the insight that staying curious longer is a good thing, and their first answer is probably not the whole truth, or maybe not even close to the real truth. So learning to stay curious and go a little bit deeper is a really powerful act.
I love that. And so in terms of developing this like practical coaching, leader-driven curriculum, if you will, right? Where did you get that from? Like, where did you get the insights and the research or the data, or how did you develop it?
Well, when I'd worked in this innovation company, the process we had for inventing new products is that you would go and run focus groups and you'd sit with people. So I'd head up to Scotland and I would run 15 focus group with Scottish women who buy soup for their family to get to the heart of what really matters to them about soup.
Yeah, right.
And effectively, I tried to do the same with this approach to coaching, which is like, what gets in the way of a manager, a normal person who isn't bought into coaching, who hasn't kind of drunk the Kool-Aid, but is just going, look, I want to know how to manage more effectively. I want to know how to bring out the best in my team, but I'm exhausted and I'm overworked and I'm overwhelmed and I've been told 1,000 different things on how to approach this. So, help me, but I don't know, can you help me? And so I was trying to serve that person. So I knew I needed to do a few things. I probably needed to make it as simple as possible, but no simpler. And in part that meant making it practical, not abstract. And one of my things I'd noticed about how coaching was taught, it was all models. It was like, here's a structure, here's an acronym, here's a star, here's a square, here's a circle, it's kind of all these things. And I'm like, in the moment, who remembers the model that they're working through?
Right.
Not many people.
Let me go get my binder.
Right. So I was like, I want to give them the best questions. So I went through this process, this relentless process of trying to write, first of all, training this. And so kind of refining and figuring out what worked and what language really hit people. And then writing this book. And the book was interesting because I'd had a book published by a New York publisher. So that was sort of fancy and I was excited by that, a different book. And then I had this idea for the Coaching Habit book. So I pitched them and they're like, sure, that sounds good. And so I wrote a version of it and showed it to them and they're like, we don't quite know, but why don't you go back and have another go at it? I'm like, oh, okay. So
maybe you could have a flow chart.
Yeah. I wrote another version of the book and they're like, no, we love you. You're wonderful, but no to this. And I wrote 5 or 6 different versions of this book for this publisher.
Really?
And I was pretty demoralized about it because I was like, I kept trying to write the book that they kept telling me that they kind of wanted, although they couldn't quite tell me what book they wanted.
Yeah.
And finally I said, look, I kind of got my mojo back and I went, look, okay, this is the book. I figured this out. It's kind of this, like, and this is now a yes/no conversation. Either you want it or I'll take it somewhere else and figure out another life for it. And to my surprise, they said no. Because my previous book had sold maybe 70 or 80,000 copies, which is a pretty solid return on a book.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had a business training people. I thought they would bet on me, but they didn't. So I licked my wounds. I was pretty upset. But then decided to self-publish the Coaching Habit. So I ended up self-publishing it and then eventually finding a hybrid publisher called Page 2. And that turned out to be brilliant because I'd written the book so many times that by the time I wrote it, it was this crystalline book. Like there's not a wasted word in this book because I've just written so many damn drafts of it. And that's part of what allowed it to really take off and fly, I think, is like how many times it'd been beaten up in the ring beforehand.
You used your model in your head was that of innovation. And
right.
I was around in the 90s too, right? And we just didn't have the word.
Woohoo.
We had the stuff.
Yeah.
Right. We did it. We just didn't call it innovation. And but what I learned a lot from like the technical people I worked with innovating was testing, and not focus groups, but testing on real people, trying it this way and trying it this way and trying it, maybe trying 3 different ways simultaneously and see which one produces the best results. And that really changed my perspective a lot. I know that's important for you too, which is, one focus group, it's a point in time.
Yeah, it's really helpful to engage in reality.
Yeah, it can be helpful.
Yeah, and the whole Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face. It's like, we're allowing your ideas or your process to kind of like meet reality and get kind of a bit scuffed by reality is only a way of making your idea or the thing you're trying to bring to your organization or bring to market more robust and more successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you write the book over and over. You publish it yourself. It's widely successful.
Amazingly successful, yeah.
Tell us, what are some of the practical tips? What are some stories? What are some lessons?
Let's start with actually figuring out what we mean by what coaching is. Mm-hmm. Because, to Patty's question before around working with sports coaches, there's a lot of baggage in the world around coaching. We've all heard of coaching now, but we've all had different experiences of it. So some of us have met the woo-woo life coach, who's like incense and blankets and candles and shamanic chanting and the like. I've been that person. Some of us have been traumatized by sports coaches making us do push-ups in the mud. Some of us have observed executive coaches getting paid big bucks to go and hang out with executives in their offices. Mm-hmm. There's 1,000 different versions of what coaching is. And everyone's like, well, I kind of know what coaching is, but I kind of not quite sure how I define it exactly. So it's really helpful just to have a really practical behavior-based definition. And so it's this. For me, coaching is, can you stay curious a little bit longer? Can you rush to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly? Because it turns out that most people, and this is certainly true in most organizations, are advice-giving maniacs. Mm-hmm. I mean, they love it because they've had a whole career being rewarded for the stuff that they know.
Right? Yeah.
And they assume that the way they best add value as a manager and as a leader or as an individual contributor in a certain context is by having an answer. Right. They're like, somebody starts talking, and after about 5 seconds, the advice monster in their brain goes, oh, this is great. I'm going to add some value to this conversation. And they kind of like stop listening. And they're just waiting for the moment to kind of interrupt with the advice.
Advice monsters. I love that. But it is true. We are,
wired,
we are quick to advise,
especially as we go through our careers, right? Yeah. I mean, I think that's the partly because we're trained to ask for permission. So when we seek permission, we're seeking advice, right? So tell me what to do that's going to be not just what you think is the best thing to do, advice giver, but the right thing to do.
I agree.
In this environment.
Yeah.
We talk about, and I've got a little TED talk about this if people want to go down a bit of a rabbit hole, but 3 different types of advice monsters, kind of 3 different drivers for us to want to give advice more quickly than we perhaps should.
Yes.
So it is tell it, save it, and control it, the 3 advice monsters. So tell it, you've got a story which is the only way I really add value is by having the answer. If I don't have all the answers to all the things, I'm a bit of a failure at my job. So it's really important that I be seen to be the person who contributes with answers. The second core driver is save it. So that's like, my job is to protect everybody from everything all the time. And I've got to make sure that I've got everybody covered. And if anybody's at all stressed or worried or anxious or nervous or at a place of ambiguity, I've failed.
Save it as in rescue it, not save it as in put it away. I see.
So exactly. So classic rescuer, if you know the drama triangle model. And the third one is control it, which is like, I've got to make sure that everything happens. I've got to make sure that no unknown chaos invades us at all. I've got to make sure that the future is entirely predictable and known. So we've got these kind of deeper drivers around this. And it means that often our default becomes, look, the way I control this situation is by giving advice. Now, it's really important that people hear that this is not about never giving advice. Like, advice is really important. I mean, this podcast is chock full of advice. So this is not about advice is bad. It's about having advice giving as your default response. And your goal is to slow down the rush to advice and to action. Because if you do that, if you can lead with curiosity, when it comes to advice and when it comes to action, you're more likely to be solving the right problem with the right solution.
I love that.
So that's a good place to start, which is like, what are we even talking about?
Yeah. Right.
While we're just there for a smidge, give us a couple of slow down tips. Right. Yeah. Because I think that the advice givers, I know this has happened to me in my life. While the person's talking, you tend to run the tape of your answer.
Yeah, for sure.
In your head. And you stop actually listening to what advice they're asking for, to your point, right? Yeah. So give us a couple of like prompts that help slow it down.
I've got some good tactics. Before I give you mine, Patty, why don't you share one of the things that you've learned over the years about slowing down your rush to giving advice?
I've learned to just shut the fuck up a little bit, right?
We used to give Patty this feedback all the time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Because I am a talker, right? Blah, 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 blah. And so, and one of mine on one of my 360s was, you take up all the air in the room, you talk so much, it would be really helpful if sometimes you just shut up.
Right.
And I thought, wow, that is so helpful.
Yeah.
Like that's really, really useful, practical advice for sometimes to just go, move into listen mode.
Yeah.
But that takes like
practice.
Yeah, takes practice.
You're talking about the power of silence and learning to listen. For me, the most practical step is learning to get used to the first awkwardness in the first 2 seconds of silence.
Oh, yeah.
Because what happens when you ask a question and then you shut up is there can be this heartbeat or two of silence, which feels like it's stretching on forever.
Yeah, right.
and actually, it's often just giving that person space.
I learned how to do that because I grew up as a recruiter, and I learned how to do that in salary negotiations because I would present it and then I would just be quiet. And then they would tell me everything. And then I would know what I needed to do or not do, or if we could get them or not,
Yeah.
But it is very, very hard to be silent and not say anything.
I wanted to ask you, Jessica, actually, if you had a lesson learned from around how do you learn to tame your advice monster, stay more present, stay more curious, is there a strategy you'd use to build on Patty's one around just shutting up?
Well, I think that is what I try to do as well. Patty and I are both talkers.
Yeah.
I will also say Patty and I are very, very curious people.
Right.
Right. So we love to learn about stuff. And we love to learn about how people's brains work and how they make decisions and all of those things. So I probably don't jump into advice mode as much as I'm like, another question. So I want to learn more and more and more. And so I've just learned to, after I get the questions, be a bit more silent and let them process and then say what they're thinking. And I'm okay with silence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think we learned a lot. I know I learned a lot from working with people much more introverted than me.
Yeah.
And that what I found was the silence gave them permission to think about their answer.
Exactly.
And most of the people, when I first started trying it, were really appreciative because part of what made them so nervous, particularly in interview situations or even in a conversation with your boss, right, is like, am I going to say the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
And the pause gives you a chance. Maybe they really want to know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Patty, to answer your question, I've just role modeled one of my strategies.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? Yeah. How did you do it?
My exact script, and people can use this exact script because this is exactly what I said to you. I went, Patty, that's a great question. I've got some ideas which I'll share with you, but I'm just curious, what are your first thoughts on this? And you're like, brilliant. And you launched into it. And so I've spent 10 minutes not sharing advice because I've just had you do the work for me. And one of the counterintuitive principles of being more coach-like is to be lazy. If you're working too hard in the conversation,
right.
Something's gone wrong.
Right.
And people don't even notice. Like, look at Patty. She's like, oh, brilliant. Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. She's away.
Yeah.
Now, let me share one additional strategy. So we've got that script, which is like one of the ways to stay curious and tame your advice monster is go, yeah, great question. I've got some thoughts. I'll share them with you, but you go first. What are you thinking? The second is, I know physically what it feels like to be in listening mode and in telling mode. And your body leads your brain. So if I want to be a better listener, I'm best when I go, this is how you sit when you're listening. And I sit a little further back and I relax my bum muscles. And I'll often put my hands on my thighs as a way of just being there. And that's my body going, brain, shut up and listen. It's not about the advice. And I know that when I'm in advice mode, I do something weird with my foot, which is I get up on my right toe. And I've actually ruined some beautiful leather shoes because they've got this weird crease in the toe from me being in too much of advice mode. So physically understanding that. The other two quick things that I would say about this, one is the more you just start noticing how quickly you interrupt, the more you can start noticing how quickly you interrupt. So it's just like, There's research that says doctors, general practitioners, on average interrupt their patients 17 seconds into the first conversation. And I think that's harsh on doctors because I think most of us do it and about that pace.
Yeah.
And the final one is to notice. It's kind of a build on the what does it feel like when you're in listening mode? Because there's also notice what it feels like when you're in fake active listening mode.
Patty and I have a term for that.
Yeah.
It's called Botox face.
Yeah.
Right.
This is the
Yeah, because you tip your head on the side and you nod and you make small grunting noises of approval and encouragement.
We invented Botox face for when particularly a candidate tells you something where you're going, are you fucking kidding me? You did what?
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
I took those 3 years off. This guy told me this once for sure. And I was selling Coke mostly to the supervisors, but it was so much more lucrative than my salary. So
That's perfect. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, probably true.
You have to admire his entrepreneurship, albeit his lack of discretion.
I hear that. In fact, I think I know who you're talking about. But.
Yeah. So that's where I leave it, which is like most of us. I feel this myself all the time. I can get into, I'm pretending to listen rather than I'm actually listening. And so resetting to listen properly can be really powerful.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point because you've got so many things going on in your brain all the time. And so you're talking to this person, then maybe your advice monster comes in, or maybe you're just thinking about something you forgot to do or an email you need to send, or you got to pick up your kid from school and you're kind of listening, but you're not really.
Right. Because I'm going to say, the two biggest shifts that people can make if they want to become more coach-like is to realize two things. The first is your ability to help people figure out the real problem is infinitely more valuable than your ability to come up with quick, not that good answers. Like quick answers are everywhere. I mean, like ChatGPT has better answers than you on almost everything.
Yeah.
So it's like, don't think that your value is in your answers, but if you have the capacity to ask questions that help you figure out what the real challenge is, that is rare and valuable and powerful because it is strategic and it is empowering and enabling. It's all sorts of things.
Yeah.
It leads me to something I wanted to talk to you about, which is like the role of the employee in this situation.
Yeah.
And it's about that sort of power shift too, right? And
Yes.
and what I just heard you say that I think is really important is it's as much our job as coaches to teach people how to think through.
Yeah.
Right. I spent forever at startups with people like, well, what's our policy on, I don't know, erasers or something like, well, what a place I had to put, what's our policy about thongs in the pool? Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm going to leave it up to you to figure that one out.
Right.
I mean, we're not going to write a policy about that. And so talk to us a little bit that I thought was really interesting listening to one of your talks about how do you become a good recipient of coaching? How do you, I want you to talk about the adult part.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that at a deep level, part of what I'm trying to create in organizations is adult to adult relationships, to move into the kind of slight therapy speak for a moment.
Yep.
And if you're going, well, that sounds good, but what does that even mean? Well, I think one useful definition is being able to ask for what you want, knowing that the answer may be no, and being able to negotiate the difference. So it's a real invitation to keep claiming your authority and your power in the organization in which you work. And the challenge is, in many organizations, just like Patty's dog, there are people howling in protest. Again, this will sound slightly therapy-esque. Is like people get infantilized a little bit. Like there's a power structure, which is like, I'm waiting for the person above me to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
The goal, I think, is like you want your organization to thrive and be successful, and you want your organization also to bring out the best in people, allow them to be the best version of themselves. And you do that not just because you're into touchy-feely personal development. You do that because if you have like adults working at the best of their capacity, working on the stuff that matters the most, you're actually more likely to succeed as an organization. You're kind of getting in. What's the real challenge here for you?
Yeah.
Is powerful because it actually helps you get clear on the twin DNA of a successful organization, which is strategy, what's the stuff that makes us different and is most important, and culture, which is how do we find the right people and get them at their best and have them working on the right stuff. And when you got that, you've actually got this organization that is powerful and more likely to succeed.
I just got goosebumps.
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hallelujah. Will you do a career confession with us?
I'd love that.
Okay.
Shall I read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
I got let go from my job 3 months ago due to performance issues / not getting along with my boss. Now I'm applying for jobs again, and I'm struggling to even get interviews. How do I get seen for jobs I'm experienced for and navigate why I'm looking for work? Are there any red flags I need to avoid looking like I have on my CV applications? If and when I get an interview, how do I be honest without looking bitchy or incapable?
Oh,
Yeah. I'd be thinking about your network because it's like, how do you find somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody and just ruthlessly work your network as best you can? It's like you got to become a bit shameless about asking for help and then asking for help again and just keep asking for help. You don't have to do it in a needy way. You just do it in I'm asking for what I want, knowing that the answer may be no.
right.
Because if you're just pumping your CV and resume into the system with AI working everywhere and scanning, you either get lucky and get through or you get unlucky.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think people buy stories. So when you get that interview, which I think you will get that interview, I'm cheering you on for that. It is really wise for you to go, what's the story that I'm going to tell around what happened here that is generous to them, shows self-awareness for you, but doesn't admit kind of deep flaws in you, but go, look, here's a dynamic that played out with that. Here's something I might do differently now in retrospect. Here's what I've learned from that. And I'm looking forward to kind of moving on from that and showing up for this next role.
Yeah. Love. Yeah,
Love.
Perfect.
Which is basically giving yourself that conversation in the mirror, like, try not to be bitchy or incapable.
Yeah.
I do think you're right. People buy stories, but also practice the story before you go into the interview.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you're going to have Jessica and Patty doing Botox face with you. Going, oh my goodness, they're digging their hole here. They're digging a grave. Yeah.
We're the ones that used to go in after the interview and say, "What'd you think of what did you think of Michael? Oh, he was great. I loved him." I'm like, "Did he tell you about his current boss? Oh God, that guy was such an asshole." No. Did he tell you about his last boss? Oh, he was even worse. I'm like, how far back did you go?
Yeah.
Because I went to high school and, he's smarter than everybody he's ever worked for in his whole life, including his parents.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. We could go on about interviews, casualties.
But no, that's a wonderful one, which is the story. And I always said, I don't want to hire anybody who's never made a mistake.
Right.
I never want to hire somebody who's made a mistake and didn't learn from it.
That's it.
Yeah. And I think the right organizations recognize that. The right leaders recognize that. They know that it's a journey. They know that, there's ups and downs. They know that there's dynamics and personalities at work. And so when the story is self-reflective, to your point, and is honest, but told in a way of what you've learned, I think that goes a long way with the right organization and the right leader.
It's really useful, I think, to understand how much status you have and therefore how much status you can give away in that conversation. So like if I'm in an interview, I just have a boatload of status. Like I'm a straight, white, old guy who's overeducated, who's written books. And so I do this when I'm talking, which is like I am actively trying to get people to laugh at me because I'm trying to lower my status and raise the audience's status so they feel better, they feel great. And I've got a lot of status to give away. If I'm a woman of color, I may be thinking differently about how much status I have, but a willingness to show some degree of self-awareness and some degree of self-deprecation, but not beyond that until you're kind of diminishing and belittling yourself. Learning that for yourself can be a place of kind of, this is what confidence looks like.
Yeah, I love that. Oh my gosh, Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Super fun.
This was amazing. It made my day.
Yay.
It's been
Yay.
delightful. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
So where can our listeners find you or more about you and your books and your
Thank you.
talks?
Well, look, if you want to geek out on the coaching habit, thecoachinghabit.com has tons of videos and free downloads and the like. So you can kind of pillage the resources there without even having to buy the book. And if you want more about me just in general and my other books and other bits and pieces, mbs.works is the website for that, mbs.works.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Truth Works. This episode was produced by Megan Hayward. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.